I got a number of not too big jobs to get done in the next couple of days, so I thought I'd do another one of these day in the repair life videos. We can discuss life and love and why comic book art is always better before they put the color on. So I think I'm going to get started with this Harley Benton. Harley Benton? Who is that? How did they come up with that name? It sounds like someone wanted to design a character that was like the embodiment of America. It's actually a German company. It's one of the store brands for Music House Thomann, which is a pretty big online retailer in Europe. I've repaired a couple of these. They're not too bad. Made in Vietnam. Hard-bitten Special Forces man Harley Benton went to Vietnam, and he saw things over there. The fire base was overrun, and he got out on that Huey, but important parts of him were left behind. This one is vaguely PR-esque in shape, but the interesting thing is someone has gone and put a set of Gretsch something Tron pickups in it. And I think that's pretty neat. I've never seen that before. The owner is fairly new to playing, and he's noticed a couple of things. Number one, the nut falls off if he takes away the string tension, which can be disconcerting. Also, these pickups, when they were put in, it's possible a spring was missed or, mispositioned, so the neck pickup is very loose and it can't really be adjusted. So this is basically a setup for this one. I like the color on this guitar. Have a quick look at the action here. Measuring at the 12th fret, we've got about 4/64ths on the bass side and just a smidge over 3 on the treble, which is very nice. This is a good sort of medium action for an electric guitar. I'll slap a capo on at the 1st fret. There's virtually no relief in this neck. Maybe 0.02 of an inch at the 6th fret. He was noticing a little bit of buzzing on his E string, and I noticed when I did a quick look at it, in this area here, frets 4, 5, 6, which generally means if you're getting buzzing there and the action is reasonable, oftentimes your truss rod is a little bit too tight. The neck is so straight that there isn't enough relief for the string. Some people can get away with that depending on how hard they strum. We might loosen the truss rod just a hair to see if we can clean that up. Looks like a 4mm recess, which is pretty common for Asian-made instruments these days. Yeah. That's all I need, just a little bit. Now we've got about 0.06 worth of relief, which should be fine. It's playing much cleaner. Of course, the action has come up a little bit with that adjustment. We're now sitting at about a 64th higher than we were, so we'll have to lower the action. So that's kind of the procedure. You work on one thing, it will change another measurement, so you go back and bring that one down, and it's sort of working on a teeter-totter. Make sure the recesses in these screws are clean before you start messing around with them. And also, make sure you've got the correct Allen key. This one happens to have a flamed maple handle. If you're lowering the strings, it's okay not to detune them. If you're going to be raising them, you're putting too much force on the threads in those screws and you could strip them out. Other things to think about when dealing with this kind of saddle that has 2 support legs. You want to keep the tops of these level or parallel with the surface of the bridge. If you let them slant, and that's an intuitive thing to do, especially at the edges, because it looks like if you do that, it'll follow the radius and be somehow correct. But if you do that, you can develop an imbalance of pressure between the 2 feet. And the one that has less pressure on it, usually the higher foot, it can want to loosen. The tension between the saddles, holding them together, can let that happen. And the one foot, it comes up slightly off the surface. Vibrations from the strings will then cause a buzz. It'll vibrate against the surface of the bridge, and you'll hear it as a high, harmonic, zingy sound. It won't come through the amp necessarily, but it can be really distracting if you're playing at low volume. So keep them flat. Each of these screws should be protruding about the same, or on both sides of the saddle. Yeah, so this guy did go flying across the room as soon as I pulled this out. Actually, even when adjusted to something close to a proper height, this is still very loose, and that could be annoying to some people. In a Gretsch, usually there's a greater neck height, so the pickup is generally pushed up higher, tightening the springs. In this case, the springs are too lax, so I'm going to replace them with something longer. I'll glue on the nut so it won't be sliding around on him. Just a little bit of super glue on the front surface, the one that contacts the end of the fingerboard. If you get a bunch of glue underneath on the wood of the neck, it makes them really difficult to remove, and it causes a lot more damage when you do finally get it to come loose. And it'll give the frets a bit of a clean and polish as well. The ends of the frets are just a little bit sharp on the fingers, so I'll smooth and round those over as well. Just cleaning up the fret slots a little bit. And I'll also remove a little bit of excess height on the top of the nut by sanding it down. Checking to make sure the string clearance over the first fret is within reason. Should be around 22 thousandths. Well, the slots were about 3 thousandths of an inch too high. So just a couple little passes with the file gets them dialed in. Up next we have a rebrake. This is a Gibson ES335. This one's an old acquaintance. I fixed this guy back in 2013, 14, thereabouts. It was the classic headstock story. But this time around there's a twist. The player apparently fell asleep with it. And I tell you, if you want to do a Jimmy and play till the Sandman comes, use a Fender product. They're designed to survive your tender nocturnal embrace. Gibsons have to go home early. They got a big meeting in the morning. So, splines. Yes, I splined it. No, the splines couldn't prevent a second break. I've been saying that for years now. I've been doing a headstock basically every month for the last decade. I've seen 4 that have rebroken. None of them spontaneously opened up. They've all either hit the ground again or, in one case, they were sat upon. I've tried using carbon fiber for the splines. I've tried using various woods, from mahogany to ebony. The second break, it doesn't ever seem to happen right in the exact same place, on the same line as the first one, because the glued pieces end up stronger than the original wood around it, so the force of the impact is moved either down or up into the neck. If you carry this to its logical conclusion and you decide you want to take the splines all the way up to the end of the headstock, the wood around and between the splines breaks. Doesn't seem to matter. Like, I've seen a modulus bass neck, which is wrapped in carbon fiber, break. So again, you can't really make a Gibson headstock unbreakable. Here's the part where I head off the comments, knowing they're going to come anyway. No, Gibson should not change the headstock angle. People who buy these guitars want exacting copies of the original instruments. They want them exactly like they were originally built, and as a company, Gibson would be foolish to try and change it. Yes, they break. If you buy a Gibson, you know it can break. Therefore, you do your best not to drop it. Actually, I don't care if you make those pronouncements in the comment section. It's good for me. Just realize, if you find yourself desperate to make a comment, often you've been manipulated into feeling that sense of urgency. I was talking with a friend who is into the psychology behind viral marketing and the ways in which people are influenced. Anytime you hear a YouTuber saying, "Tell me what you think in the comment section," that's more about you hitting enter in the response field than it is about anything you have to say. More comments means the algorithm sees the video as it's a hot property. You know, people want to see this. That means more ad revenue. And then its little robot brain wants to spread it even further. The thing is, it doesn't have to be so overt, you know, begging for clicks. Guitar repair video could include a scene where the host does something slightly asinine, like maybe pull the strings on some potentiometers through an archtop guitar without threading the washers and nuts on first. Makes him look like an idiot. Because he knows a reliable segment of the viewing population can't see that and let it go without chiming in and asserting their superior knowledge or perceptiveness. You know, some people, they need that endorphin rush of being right. And you can capitalize on that. In guitar video, you know, it might make the creator an extra $10 over the life of the video, which is great. Doesn't really hurt anyone. But realize the same technique of subtle manipulation can also be used to bump up the numbers for much larger sociological, political, financial considerations, which, you know, financial and political considerations can sometimes be one and the same. I mean, you guys have heard of internet influencers. That term? That word is used for a reason. Sometimes you're being sold something, but other times you're just sort of being, I don't know, pushed to think a certain way. And you might not even realize that your mindset is changing, but it's slowly being pushed a certain way. That'll make it easy for someone to get something done. You know, you don't even feel like a passive participant when you're sharing information or saying something. I guess my hope for you as a viewer is that you learn to be perceptive and recognize it. You know, if, when, how you're being utilized in that fashion. Because it's kind of becoming an essential life skill, I think. Your well-being can depend on it. Before injecting a bunch of glue, I made sure to put on a good quantity of paste wax on the truss rod nut and its threads. This is slightly thinned Titebond. I pushed it into all the nooks and crannies and then clamp it up using a padded caul on the back of the headstock and a flat block on the front. So I augment that with some surgical tubing down in that transition area where the neck starts to curve and it's difficult to put pressure. This works well there. Just sanding this down with some 600 grit sandpaper here to kind of even up the level between the cracks a little bit. Glued down nice and tight, but you can feel those cracks. So I'm going to shoot a quick little coat of red lacquer over top of this and then let that dry, and maybe 2 coats of clear. He really doesn't care about the appearance. In fact, I think he probably relishes the scars. But I'm just going to seal it up a little bit and make it slightly more presentable for my own peace of mind. Just a little thin super glue here. I'll get down into any remaining fissures or cracks and help seal up the surface a little bit. It's transparent lacquer, but I'm not afraid to go a little bit heavy, get a bit dark there, because I know I'm going to sand this off slightly before I apply the clear coats. And then we've got a Larrivee. This is an LVO3 made in July of 2013. The player is dissatisfied with the pickup in this. It's got an LR Bags element in it, and it's no longer doing the job for him. He wants to swap that out with a K&K Pure Mini. It's the sound he likes. And I think I've mentioned before that it really is my favorite acoustic pickup. Certainly the best sounding passive pickup that I deal with on a regular basis. I mean, nothing sounds as good as a microphone, but if you have to plug in, to my ears, this is amongst the least offensive options. They're not a sponsor, by the way. You know what's really depressing? Hearing a studio recording where you can tell that they just plugged an under-saddle pickup right into the board. I don't care how good the song is. At that point, you've basically lost me. So we come up against something that happens over and over again in guitars these days. What do you do with this? There's an electronics module stuck in the side. the player's initial suggestion was to just turn it into a sound port, and it's too big. There's no way to make it elegant enough where it wouldn't be distracting to look at, you know. And I think sonically it might be irresponsible of me to try. And then I thought to myself, well, why not try and run that K&K through this preamp? You'd have onboard volume control at least, which is a good thing. Most stage musicians really do want the volume control. They'll dispense with a lot of the other bells and whistles. People will dial in the tone they like through their amp settings and probably leave it like that forever. Or maybe use an external EQ, but it's nice to be able to turn up or down when you're standing on stage and not have to turn back to your amp. So I've never done this before, and we'll give it a shot. We should try it out for comparison's sake, but it's not going to be a true fair test because the action on this right now is really too low, which is surprising because this player usually likes a slightly higher than average string height. But right now it's 3/64ths on the bass side, 2 on the treble. So it's kind of hit and miss. And of course, I don't have a really good acoustic amp. I don't really have a good amp at all. People will ask me to show off my equipment collection and I laugh because, you know, I don't have one. I don't sit around and play because there just isn't time, you know. This thing came in tuned sort of like Dadgad, but down a bit, like C sharp plus. Very imbalanced. It's like it's missing a few strings in the center. It's really loud up top. Yeah, that's no good. So in this case, the undersaddle strip has a mini jack attached to it, which plugs right into the preamp. So this shouldn't be too difficult. It's good. It's not too tight in the slot. That can cause issues. If there's not enough room for it to vibrate against the strip, you end up having dead spots between strings. Using some sandpaper on a flat block to lightly sand, and then I'll clean the area of the bridge plate where the K&K pickup elements are going to be installed. Each of the transducers is pigtailed on the single hot lug of the jack. I'll check and see how much length I need. Might want another inch or two, so I snipped the old cable off and unbraided some of the shielding here. Then I unsoldered the leads in the ground from the K&K jack and spliced them onto the mini jack wire. Some heat shrink tubing for the hot leads. It's like magic every time. Then a wider piece to cover everything else. Installing the K&K is, I'm not going to say it's hard, but it's probably more daunting for the non-professional to install. Mostly because to do it right, you're actually gluing these things in place with super glue. So you have to be fast and accurate because you don't really get a second shot. In practice, it is possible to peel the transducers off and clean them again, but you don't want to do that if you don't have to. The instruction manual that comes along with this is one of the best you'll ever see, and they give you a little positioning jig as well, because placement is important. The dots here are on the smaller side. There are some fakes out there that have much larger transducers. They don't work as well. You want these to be centered on the saddle slot. And again, I mean, I've seen them installed pretty far off and still sound okay, but you know, best to do it right. In some of the older guitars with very little space between the bridge pins and the saddle, sometimes you have to move them forward a little bit. Otherwise, the ball ends of the strings could be riding on top of the transducer, which doesn't seem right. But then again, you also have to check because those old guitars often have smaller bridge plates, and this thing needs to be on the plate. You don't want it hanging half off. On this model, Pure Mini, it's got 3 transducers, They have ones with 2 for mandolins and ukuleles. There's also one with 4, the classic, which I don't think I've ever seen. So this cute little jig is a strip of plastic here. There is a white pin. In this case, it's actually a little bit small for the diameter of the hole that was drilled for it, so I put a piece of tape on it. That gets inserted into the bridge pin hole, and then they give you a golf tee, which goes in the bridge pin hole farther down the line. The plastic is sort of translucent here, so I can see through where the bridge is, and they give you a little bit of putty, sticky stuff, and you peel off a little ball of that, and positioning this so that when you press down on the transducer, it's going to be centered and in the right position relative to that pin. I put the little humpy part here. There's a flat spot and it sort of arcs up into this hump. I put that one towards the sound hole and just press down. And that's sticky enough that I can now apply glue to that, take out the golf pin, pull this thing up, get this in there. I can feel around where the other thing is, and then apply some pressure with the glue applied, and that's going to stick in the right spot. When you do it for real, it's a good idea to protect the top of the instrument. And I'm using a gel viscosity super glue, not the thin stuff, not the medium viscosity. The gel gives you enough time to do this, and you should be pretty generous with it. You really want to coat the bottom of this thing because a little bit of squeeze out is a good idea. Now you have to be pretty quick, but there is a little bit of working time. So I've got the white one through, and I can feel where the golf tee should go. That's in the right spot. Now I'm going to press up firmly, and I'm going to hold things tight there for at least half a minute. Having held it in place for 30 or so seconds, I'm now just going to let it sit there without touching the jig for another 5 minutes or so, just to make sure that the glue has had a really good chance to cure before I try to remove the putty from the pickup. With the transducers in place, I can make a new saddle that's tall enough for adjustment. I can also package up the pickup leads to keep them neat and out of the way. Beyond that, it's starting to look like a regular setup. I'll work on getting the action height correct and do the intonation points for the saddle, and finally put some strings on it. So the K&K works fine with this. All the controls do what you'd expect them to do. Like I was saying, there are now a lot of guitars from the 80s and 90s with these electronic boxes that no longer work, sort of poking out the sides. And it's always kind of depressing, you know, being a person who likes to work on old things. I think if you're the kind of player who actually does fool around with all of these settings during performance, it probably makes more sense to put it all in a box on the floor. You could have bigger, more robust, more reliable, possibly easier to repair components, and maybe even have presets, so you're not even having to worry about switching it around beyond stomping on something. Anyway, this guitar sounds great, unamplified, and so we'll try it out with the new pickup.